Dang it. Let's try again. In this video, I want to show you how to master the bait caster. Of course, that wasn't perfect, but in this video, I truly believe by the end of it, you'll be able to place a lure anywhere you want.
My name's Tyler, and in today's episode, we're gonna talk, control yourself.
Now, by far the most important thing when it comes to learning how to cast a bait caster like a pro is understanding your bait cast reel, understanding when to use the spool tension knob, understanding when to use the magnetic brakes, also understanding how to thumb a spool. Now, we're gonna get into that in just a moment, but before I do, I wanna tell you about the 5 biggest mistakes that a lot of anglers make when they're starting to learn the bait caster. The first big mistake is do not use a casting plug. I know that these things are literally intended to help you to learn how to cast with a bait caster, but these things cast like a missile. They're literally like a bullet, and there is no lure that we own that casts like these. So you're gonna kind of get a false hope when using a casting plug, thinking that you can cast very, very well. But as soon as you go to using a jig or a spinnerbait or a crankbait, they cast way different, and it's going to cause a lot of backlashes when it actually matters. So anytime I am practicing my bait caster, I'm gonna use just a 3/8 ounce jig like the one that you got here. I'm also gonna put a crawl style bait like this X-Zone Adrenaline Crawl. Now, I really like the 3/8 ounce size when it comes to a jig because I think it best represents a lot of lures as a whole. Now, by using this jig, it's going to catch wind just like any other lure, and that's going to help you to learn actually how to cast the bait caster. Now, mistake number 2, casting should be one fluid movement. It's not multiple movements. I see a lot of guys that will take their rod backwards and let it sit, and then they'll go from a resting position and they'll just whip their rod forward, and that movement is going to cause a ton of backlashes. Now, as we get into the demonstration of casting, I'll show you exactly what I mean by one fluid, smooth movement. Now, mistake number 3 is do not let your elbows get way away from your body. Today, I'm gonna show you how to do a simple underhand roll cast. It is probably the cast that we use the most as fishermen, and literally every time you're casting, except for maybe really, really far long cast, you're going to be keeping your elbows in. You should be able to hold a bag of worms in your armpit while casting all the time. Casting is truly more in your wrists. It's not in your elbows, so keep your elbows in. Now, mistake number 4 is make sure you have the right rod, especially when you are just learning a bait caster. If you're using a really long rod or if you are using a really stiff rod, those are both a little bit harder for you to cast. So I really recommend something in the 6' 6" to 7 foot range, and something that is like a medium heavy power and a moderate to moderate fast action. Now, mistake number 5 actually has to do with the line that you're using. I don't care if it's monofilament, fluorocarbon, or braid. I don't care if it's 12-pound test, 14-pound test, or even 20-pound test. One of the most important things that you want to make sure when learning how to cast is do not overfill your spool. Now, for me personally, after using a bait caster for well over 20 years, I like to have a full spool because it really allows me to get a long distance cast a lot better. But if you are just getting started with a bait caster, I'm actually gonna recommend that you don't fill it up all the way, that you actually leave about an 1/8 inch of a gap to the top of your spool, even a little bit bigger. Having a little bit more of a gap is going to help prevent a lot of backlashes, especially when you are first getting started. All right, now let's dive into the most important thing about casting a bait caster, which is understanding your bait cast reel. Now, on the same side as your reel handle, you will have your spool tension knob. Now, as you tighten up the spool tension knob, it actually compresses down on the spool, making it harder for the spool to rotate. Now, if I loosen up my spool tension knob all the way, there will actually be side-to-side play within the spool, and if I click on my button here, my lure is gonna fall like a rock. Now, as I tighten the spool tension knob, again, it compresses down on the actual spool itself, and you will actually lose that side-to-side play on your spool. And you can actually tighten these up all the way that when you click the button, your lure will not even fall at all. Now, on the other side of your bait caster, you will typically have magnetic brakes or centrifugal brakes. These are the brakes that you're going to use the most when trying to dial in your casting. Now, some reels on the side of it, you're gonna have a little dial where you can crank it up to its max or you can crank it down to its minimum. Now, other reels, you'll actually have to pop off your side plate to be able to access your centrifugal brakes. Now, whether you are using magnetic brakes or centrifugal brakes, they are both trying to accomplish the same goal, which is slowing down your spool. The biggest reason that we get a backlash is because our spool is spinning too fast. When you make a cast, your bait is flying through the air, but say that wind starts to slow that bait down. If your spool is rotating faster than your bait is traveling in velocity, that is what's going to cause you to backlash. So the best way for us to not get a backlash is by applying more brakes, whether that's, again, magnetic brakes or centrifugal brakes. Now, if you are just getting started with a bait caster, I'm gonna recommend that you put your brakes all the way to the maximum setting. Now, magnetic brakes are pretty self-explanatory. All you gotta do most of the time is crank it up to the maximum setting. This Arc Gravity 5 reel that I have actually has 60 different settings. So I'm gonna put it on the top one, number 60. Now, if you're using a reel that has those centrifugal brakes, a lot of times you're gonna pop off the side, and I want you to put all of those brakes on, which means they're going to be pushed outward. Centrifugal brakes are just like a tire swing. If you are spinning around on a tire swing and your extremities are sticking out, you're going to slow down. But if you bring those extremities in, you're going to rotate a lot faster. The same thing happens with those centrifugal brakes. If you have those popped out, you're going to slow the spool down. But if they're all popped in, you're going to let that spool spin a lot faster, which at times can cause more backlashes. All right, I currently have my magnetic brakes on their maximum setting, and right now, if I click on my button, my lure is not dropping at all, and that's because of my spool tension knob, which we talked about earlier. It is all the way tight. Now again, if you are just getting started, I wanna show you a little trick here. I'm gonna actually keep my button on, and I'm gonna slowly back off my spool tension knob. Now I want this lure to fall at about 1 foot every second. So about right there, look at that. See how slow it's going? It's very, very slow, which means that this reel right now is very, very tight. It is so tight that you don't even need to use your thumb to cast. I mean, watch this. If I cast that bait out, look, zero backlash. I just casted that out, I don't know, probably 25 yards and zero backlash. So if you are just getting started, having these settings pretty tight is going to allow you to do just that. Now, while that is all good and it can really help you to gain confidence with casting the reel, you don't want your bait cast reel to be that tight. Actually, having it that tight can cause a little bit of damage to the reel over time. So instead of using the spool tension knob as kind of the main way to add tension to your spool, that's where your thumb comes along. Your thumb is what's going to apply a little bit of tension to the spool as you are making a cast. All right, now I'm gonna show you the actual casting demonstration. We've talked about the mistakes. We've talked about how to set up your reel. Now I'm gonna actually show you the casting motion so that you can start practicing that. And then as you start to understand the casting motion, you can then start to loosen your settings of your reel so that you can start to cast a lot further. Now, right now, my spool is still very tight. If I hit my button, it's still falling at about 1 foot every second. But I'm gonna show you guys an underhand roll cast. This is, like I said, the most popular type of cast. I'm gonna show it to you real quick, and then I'm gonna walk it through. So imagine my bait is in the water. I'm gonna bring it up like this, circle around, and make a cast just like that. That is a simple underhand roll. I'm gonna do it again. just like so. And you can see it casts perfectly. I don't even need to use my thumb because of how tight my reel is. When I go to actually cast, I'm gonna reel it up and I'm gonna just make a loop, just like this. And again, keep your elbows in. This doesn't require a lot of movement in your arms. You're literally just doing this, making a circle. As a matter of fact, you can kind of just do a figure 8 like this to kind of get the motion. Now you can have a lot of line out actually when you make this particular cast. I would never go too little. You don't want to be casting with only about a 2 inches from the tip of your rod to your lure. I like somewhere around that 1.5 to 2 foot range, just about like that, but you can go big. I mean, sometimes I'll bring a lure up and it's like this, and you can still make a cast just like so, but never do it where you have your lure too close to your rod tip. Now again, right now, because my spool is so tight, I don't even have to use my thumb, and I'm not even getting a backlash at all. So the thing is that this is where you want to start if you are new to the bait caster. So it is completely fine to just spend some time casting with your brakes all the way up and that spool tension knob really where it's about 1 foot a second. So I'm just gonna make a lot of casts. I'm gonna get used to just that casting motion. That is the most important thing that you can do. I'm also using my thumb. Even though I don't need to, I'm kind of getting the feeling of what it feels like to just use my thumb on the spool. Now, as you get more and more comfortable doing that, that is when you're going to start to crank your spool tension knob down. You want it to get like more and more loose. So as you can see, I was going at about 1 foot a second. If I loosen it up a little bit more, now it's about 2 foot a second. So now I'm gonna keep casting. Now keep in mind that the more that you back off your spool tension knob, the more you're actually going to have to use your thumb to kind of slow down your spool. So when you actually go to cast, I'm gonna let my thumb almost lay on my spool. I don't want to press on it. I just kind of want to keep it really close to my spool. Like a lot of times I can feel the line moving throughout the entire cast when I make that cast. My thumb is just literally sitting on the spool, helping to prevent that spool from going too fast. Now the big thing you can see here, I'm only making about a 20-yard, 25-yard cast each and every time. Now, if you want to make a little bit longer casts, that is when your arms will get a little bit further away from your body. For example, if I make a cast that's really far, you can see that my elbow now has kind of gone upwards from the body, which is fine. If you're, I mean, that cast right there probably went 40 yards. You know, it's almost double what I was doing. So if I'm making longer casts, I still have the same motion, but I'm allowing my elbow to come away from my body a little bit. Now, as you continue to get better at casting and you can bring that spool tensioner knob down, to me, there really is kind of a sweet spot with the spool tension knob. Remember earlier when we talked about if you have it really loose, you're gonna have side-to-side play. But if you have it really tight, there's no side-to-side play. So at that moment, at that point where you go from having a little bit of side-to-side play to no side-to-side play is right where I like to have my spool tensioner knob live. And that's where I keep it for the majority of the time. Now, once you are able to cast pretty good with the spool tension knob in that zone, I want you to then start loosening up the brake settings. Again, our brake settings have been on max the entire time. And to me, really the perfect setting with your brake settings is kind of dead in the middle of whatever brake settings you have. For example, if your dial goes from 0 to 10, you're gonna want it set somewhere around 5. Or if it goes from 0 to 20, somewhere around 10. You know, for this particular reel, I have 60 different settings. So somewhere around 30 is where I want it to be. Now, if you have centrifugal brakes, a lot of times you're going to have 6 different brakes. So you're going to pop 3 of them on and 3 of them off, making sure that you pop every other one on or off to make sure that that spool is balanced. Now, pretty much anytime that I go fishing, that is where I keep my reels, and I will typically adjust my magnetic braking to kind of account for whatever lure that I'm throwing, or if I'm throwing in windier conditions. If I'm throwing into the wind, that's gonna slow my lure down. So I want to slow my spool down as well. That's when I will crank my magnetic brakes up. But if the wind is at my back and my lure is really sailing, I can actually crank my magnetic settings down to allow that spool to spin faster. You will also notice that some lures just catch more wind than other lures. So therefore they are going to slow down a lot quicker on a typical cast. If they are slowing down, a lot of times that is when you want to, again, crank up your magnetic settings so that it slows down the spool. Now, real quick, before I let you go, I just want you to know that no matter what you do, at times, you're going to get a backlash. No matter how experienced you are with using a bait caster, sometimes we all still go out, we don't mess around with our settings, we make a cast without thinking about it, and we blow up a spool. It happens to all of us, and it can happen easily to you.